Hi, I'm Lisa Niven Kelly, founder of Beaducation, and you are here to learn how to make some stamped metal jewelry. We're all set to teach you that. So I've been teaching stamping since about 2002, and I've written a book and I've taught classes, and I'm really excited to share a bunch of tips and tricks with you. Let's get started talking about these tools here. Couple things you need for stamping, just the basic setup. I'm going to show you what it is here and then we're going to go into depth. Hammer, hole punch pliers, bench block, some letter sets, and some design stamps. There's all kinds of other fancy stuff other than that, but let's talk about these basics first so you can get started. Let's talk first about letter sets. Just like anything else, you're going to find letter sets in different quality and different prices. So the cheaper stuff might be made over in China or India, and then there's some nice sets made here in the United States. The stuff in the United States is going to be a nice high quality hardened tool steel, and that's going to make your stamps last. They also oftentimes will come in a nice box like this, where each letter has its own little slot, which comes in really handy when you're kicking into production work. So if you're working with a set like this and you pull out the R, all the other letters are going to bunch together. You're going to have a hard time finding your letters. Seems a little silly, but it's really helpful. So the United States high quality sets also tend to have a little indicator on the stamp. It might be a little notch or it might be the actual letter. And that's where you're going to put your thumb when you're stamping, and it helps you orient your stamp so that your letter faces the right way. That's also very helpful. So a lot of little bells and whistles on the higher end stuff. But to be honest, the cheaper sets are a great set to get started on too. Just be aware that they come coated in grease. So you'll see the stinky grease all over it. That's a good thing though, because it kept them from rusting when being shipped from overseas. So just grab a paper towel, take out each letter and wipe it off. You can leave a little bit of grease on there, but don't try to wash it off with soap and water. Don't do that. Here's some more tools you're going to need. Let's talk about design stamps. So just like the letter stamps, these are going to be made in various countries and various designs out there. Since stamping has picked up, you'll find a lot more designs on the market, and there's some really fun ones. But design stamps can be pretty tricky. So when I get into the demo portion of this class, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks. Okay, design stamps. And I've got these sitting just in the top of one of my letter sets, holding them up, or you can get little design stamp trays. We offer a couple of those. Bench block. You need a nice, pristine, clean bench block with very hardened tool steel. Remember, don't let this roll around in your bag with the rest of your hammers and such, because it'll nick it up, and any of those indentations in the block will show up in the back of your jewelry when you go to hammer on it. So let's take good care of your bench block. You're going to also need a way to pop a hole in your blank if you are going to be adding a jump ring and hanging it as a pendant. So of course, if you've got a flex shaft tool, you can drill a hole, or sometimes I just use my Dremel tool to drill a hole. There's other hand tools available as well. Screw down hole punch works well, and my favorite for a thin blank is the hole punch pliers. It's pretty simple. I'm going to show you how to use that when we get to the demo portion as well. All right, so now you need a hammer to strike your stamps with. Make sure that your hammer is at least 1 pound in weight, which is 16 ounces, because you're going to need that weight behind the blow to get a deep impression. Those light hammers, like them girly hammers with the flower handles or the pink handles, we need a heavier hammer than that. So for years I just used a basic old nail pounding hammer, just a household hammer here, and it worked just fine. So that is an option, just cheap from your local hardware store. Or what I use now pretty much exclusively is a brass head mallet. And what's nice about this guy is the brass, it's a pound as well. It also comes in 2 pound, we'll get to that. But the brass is a very dense metal. So when you stamp, it sits and it hits it like a dead blow hammer. You don't get any bounce back, which can kind of cause a little double impression with your stamp. One thing to note about the brass head mallet is it is a soft metal even though it's dense. So the head of the hammer will get all dinged up, and that's totally fine. It's actually nice because if you were to hit your stamp a little bit off, the head of the stamp sinks into the hammer and it distributes the blow better rather than the hammer just bouncing right off. So I really like the brass head mallets. Don't use your chasing hammer for stamping. Although traditionally this tool is used for striking other tools, it will ding it up and it's not heavy enough. So I tend to use my chasing hammer for forging wire work and so forth, and I want to keep it nice and clean, but the main thing is it's not heavy enough. And since we're talking about hammers, I do use a plastic mallet to flatten out my metal if it distorts at all while I'm stamping it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Last but not least, we need a way to get the dark into the impressions so you get to see that contrast. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that. You can use these solutions, liver of sulfur or silver black, which actually react with the metal to cause the dark, then buff it away from there. We'll get into that. Or you can do the cheap and dirty way, like I do often, using a Sharpie pen or a permanent pen. What's nice about this is it comes in colors, so you can also add colors down into the impression. We'll talk a little bit about that, but with these two, liver of sulfur and silver black, I'm going to refer you to their product pages on Beaducation.com. So we have a lot of information and some little product videos there so you can learn about them. Whichever way you choose to add the dark, you're going to need to buff it off of the surface of your metal. So you can use steel wool, and you want to find the finest steel wool that you can get because you don't want to texture up your metal too much, followed by a polish cloth, or Pro Polish pads do the job of both of those in one step. And this has a little micro abrasive in it as well as a polish compound, so it'll buff it off really nicely. All right, so to summarize, what you need to get started is a hammer, a bench block, a letter set, some design stamps, a hole punch, a way to add black, a way to polish it off, and let's get started stamping. As you can see, we have a large variety of metals as well as shapes. And what you're looking at here is a bunch of pre-stamped blanks and some cast pieces. The metals you see are brass, copper, this is gold fill, some nickel silver, some sterling and silver filled, and some anodized aluminum. These are the metals that we tend to stick with when making stamped metal jewelry, but you can stamp on any metal as long as it's not too hard where it will damage your stamps. For practice, I tend to stick with copper because it's nice and cheap. Out of all the blanks that we sell, still the plain circle is by far the most popular, and we carry a large variety in all these metals. For thickness, we tend to stick with 24 gauge or thicker. Okay, here comes the fun part. We're ready to start stamping. I'm going to work first with a piece of 24 gauge copper sheet to practice on. Got my bench block, I've got my hammer, and I've just grabbed any old letter here to practice. A couple other things to point out. Notice my bench block has no padding under it. It's just flat on my table. If I have any padding under the bench block, I'm going to get a little bounce and a shadowed look, and that's not what I'm going for. So flat on your table. Before lining up and all that, practicing design and so forth, I just want to talk about how to hold the stamp and how to hold the hammer. So when you hold your stamp, make sure you're holding it straight up. You don't want it tilted to any direction. And don't hold it too high because then it's too hard to stabilize. I kind of put my pinky down here and hold it sort of low. And I press slightly into the metal, but I'm not pushing really hard. Also, don't give it the death grip here with your stabilizing hand because your hand will get real tired real soon. Now over here on the hammer, I don't hold way back on the handle because it's a little harder to control. I'm going to let the weight of the head do most of the work, and I'm going to hold it midway right about here. When striking, you want to come right on top. Try not to come at an angle like this, or like this, or like this, or you might not get a really good impression. So let's give it a go. I give it one strike. That looks pretty good. We're gonna zoom in a bit. If you feel like you don't have a lot of strength in your arm and you want to give it 2 whacks, that's fine. And let me show you too light and too heavy, and then we'll zoom in and take a look. Too light, you won't be able to see the ink or the oxidation once you get it into your impression. And too heavy, you might pick up an edge. So let's zoom in here. You might pick up an edge of your letter and it won't look real good. So those first 3 Z's that I did on the top look great. The next one you can see is a little light, and the next one I got a little crazy. I want to point out that tiny little line to the right of the bottom of the Z. That's what happens when you stamp too hard. You catch the edge of your stamp. So grab a letter, don't worry about spelling yet, just get used to how to hold the stamp and how to hold the hammer, and practice that for a little bit. Now that you've practiced how to hold the stamp and how to hit the stamp, let's practice lining the letters up left to right and top to bottom as well. One thing we need to talk about before we move on though, is I want you to take a look at some of these stamps. So here's a Z that we were using. This was the uppercase Kismet. It's a Beaducation original set. And this is a Z from the economy uppercase set, and this is an A from a USA made uppercase set. I want to point out on these 2 stamps, you see how you can't really count on the stamp, excuse me, the letter being centered on the stamp. Look at this A, it's way over on the side, and the Z is way down at the bottom. So we're going to have to accommodate for that when we stamp, because ideally, I know what you're thinking, you want to just draw a line and line up your stamp and hit it. That's not always going to make sure that you have a centered letter. I will say on the Beaducation Originals, it will. Yes, I'm bragging about our stamps. They're really, really awesome. You can line up your stamp to a line and get a straight line. I want to talk a little bit about that later. For now, I more want to help you problem solve for the stamps that don't have a perfectly centered letter. So let's start by drawing a line. This is one of a few techniques you can use. I'm going to draw a line just right here with Sharpie and a straight edge. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit for this, because what I want to show you is, again, because the A is way off center, if I just lined up my stamp and hit it, then I'm not going to be able to make sure that everything else is lined up. So what I do is I look for the reflection of my letter. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera, but I lay down my stamp, peek underneath it, see if the A is where I want it to be, left to right, tip it up, and stamp it. You can also tilt it to the side and peek under this way, or the other way if you're left-handed. What I notice though that I need to do first is polish up my metal a little bit. So see how you can kind of see the A there? Look what happens after I polish it. I don't want to remove my line, but I can have a nicer reflection here. There, now you can really see it. Do you see it there? So lay it down and stamp. So these are coming out okay. So you can work with the top to bottom spacing this way, or if I was spelling backwards, I would lay the stamp to the left here, look for the reflection of exactly where I want it to be, and set it up. Now again, with practicing like this, just grab one letter. Oops, I slid off, but it came okay. Just grab one letter so you're not spending a bunch of time right now working on spelling out a word. Let's more practice or more concentrate on getting everything lined up. So that's not too bad. And remember, they're not going to come out perfect. Come on now, you can't make it perfect. You don't want it to look like it's a machine, but I'm going to teach you ways to get it close. All right, one more trick is we're going to use some painter's tape. Now this has a couple different added benefits. Some people use this to actually tape their piece down to the bench block if we're using something smaller. But I'm going to use it as an edge. You can use a couple of pieces of painter tape if you want a little more thickness to it. But what you can do with this is lay down your stamp and scoot it down lightly till you feel the edge of the protruding letter touch the tape, and then stamp. And see how the bottom of that A is right there with the tape? It's not a big deal if you actually stamped in a little of the tape because it'll pull out. That's a great way to get them lined up in a straight line. That's not going to help you get them lined up perfectly left to right, but you will get a pretty straight line. One thing to note about this, it works for almost all the stamps, but if you're using a lowercase stamp, and let's say it's one that hangs low, like a J or a G, you're going to have to accommodate for that and let it overlap a little bit. I want to demonstrate what I was talking about with our original stamp sets. And here's a set here. This is the uppercase Kismet. They each have their own hole. They each have a letter on the stamp, and they're coated in nickel to avoid rusting. So let me show you how to line these guys up. It's really a thing of beauty. You can actually line up the edge of the stamp with a line right there. And because these are so precision made, each letter is perfectly centered on your stamp so that they line up nice and straight. Look at that. Oh my gosh. I just want to show you one little trick with the lowercase. Okay, this tip I'm going to show you actually applies to both the lowercase and the uppercase. And I showed you how to get a straight line, but to line them up left to right, what I do is take the stamp. You can, again, use the reflection technique, or I take the stamp and sort of cover about halfway of the previous letter if I'm stamping off to the right. So I've covered halfway of the Z front of it, and that gives me great spacing. That works well for the uppercase and the lowercase. Let me grab a little lowercase m here. The only letter it doesn't work well for is a thin letter, like an L or lowercase I. So you'll notice here that because my letters, the lowercase, are smaller, they're shifted up higher a little bit. So you have to remember there's a little space between the letter and the edge of the stamp. Let me see if I can bring this up for you. This space here, you have to remember that space is going to pop in there. So if I was stamping a full word here, I might want to shift my lowercase down a little bit. Let me show you a couple of things on this lowercase stamps of our originals, because I don't want you to be confused when you look at them. Now, you see this K here, it doesn't look centered on the stamp. It's shifted way high on the stamp, and that's so that the bulk of the K is centered. So don't be confused when you see that. Don't think that they aren't perfectly centered. They're centered so that the bulk of the K and the top of the J will line up with each other. Give it a try, you'll see what I mean. Now we need to talk about design stamps. They're a little trickier than working with the letter sets, and they need a little more attention. So we've got two options here. Sometimes, if it's a simple design, I might work with my 1-pound hammer. If it has a little more detail, it's going to be a little harder to stamp, so I'm going to bump it up to the 2-pound. Let's show you how that works. Now remember, with design stamps, the more detail to the stamp, the more hard it is to impress, because you're not removing the metal, you're moving it, and all that movement of the metal needs to happen at the same time and smoothly. So I'm going to use this star stamp. It's pretty straightforward. It's not too hard. And I'm just going to practice over here. And that turned out pretty good. Let me show you there. See that star? Let me grab a more detailed stamp like this large heart spiral. So the more detail to a stamp, or the bigger in size, the harder it might be to stamp. Let me try just one whack. Now that came out okay, but as you can see, if you compare it to like these Z's over here, it's really light. So I would have preferred it was a little bit deeper. I did a good job at getting the entire stamp to impress, but I want it to impress a little deeper. So let's try 2 strikes. A little bit better. Let's try the big ol' hammer. That's a little better too. Now something interesting to point out on this one, it's deeper on the left than on the right. You may not be able to see it on camera, but trust me, it is. So that leads me to my next technique, which we call the tilt and tap. This is a way of stamping that we do to make sure that all sides of the design impress. So what I'm going to do is hit it more than once, and I'm going to slightly tilt my stamp each time I hit it. Now I'm over exaggerating here so you can see it on camera, but really I'm going to do it just tiny bits and then strike each time. Sort of think of it maybe as tilting north, east, south, west. That was pretty good. So let me demonstrate that with a more detailed stamp. Here's the castle stamp, and it has a lot of detail to it. So let's problem solve this guy. It's pretty big. It's like a 9mm stamp. Let's try first with 1 strike with the 1-pound hammer. That came out pretty good. I did get all the parts of it, but it's a little light. So let me come in with the 2-pound. That's better. Now how about one more? Let me grab a really difficult one. I'm going to grab this tiara because I'm actually going to use it in my finished pendant that we're going to make in a minute. And this guy's hard to get to impress all the parts. That was basically horrible. I hardly even got the right side of it. Look at that. You saw my hammer kind of slip. My hands are a little sweaty. So what I need to do, and this is why I always practice a design stamp in copper before moving on, even if I feel like I'm the best stamper in the world, is I need to press down a little harder to make sure everything is sitting right. And again, I only caught the right side. So this tells me that I kind of tilt to the right without realizing it. So I'm going to try to overcompensate and tilt it a little bit to the left. That was a little better. So this is a great example of why I would use the tilt and tap method with a stamp with this much detail. So let's give that a try. And there we go, much better. So the project I'm about to demo for you is going to be just a plain, simple pendant with the word Annabelle on it. I'm making it for my friend, that's her daughter's name. So I was trying to decide which blank to use. So here's a great tip for design. You can take your blank and actually trace it onto a thick piece of paper like cardstock. And I've traced it with a sharp pencil here, and then we're going to zoom in here so I can show you that you can actually get in there with your letters, stamp very lightly, and impress it into the paper here to make sure that it fits and to sort of set up your design. Now I just laid my paper on my table, or actually I put a magazine under it. You don't want to do that on your bench block. But what you can see here is that I really like this design. I think it's neat, everything lined up, the letters lined up well. This is another interesting one. I've got a little design stamp down there, but you can't really see that. I'm going to go for the circle though. I'm going to do a basic one. And what I learned here when I stamped it is that I need to start with my A way over to the left because I sort of ran out of room. You see that there? but this is a great way to sort of plan out your design and play with it a bit. I decided to go with the circle, and I traced it a couple times here, and then got out with my pencil and just started doodling different designs. This is my favorite of the three, but in order to teach you how to get a straight line and get your words centered, I'm going to go with this one. All right, I'm almost ready to stamp, but there, you want to prep it, get it all ready so it's close to perfect. So what I've done here is I've got my blank. It's a sterling silver 24 gauge 7/8 inch circle. And I've taped it down to the bench block. I'm also using the top of the tape as my reference line. So it's a dual purpose piece of tape there. I'm going to use my ruler to help find the center. And once I find the center of this blank, I'm going to be stamping one direction and then the other. So that's the way to get your word centered on your blank. You want to find the middle of your blank, find the middle of your word, and then stamp one direction and the other. So what I do here is I like to write out the word so that I am spelling properly. When I'm spelling backwards, I have goofed that up many times. So I've got it written there for that. And I've also put a number above each letter so I know where the center is. And it looks like the center is right here between the B and the E. So let's find the center of our blank. Again, this is 7/8 inch. So it's kind of hard to mark the center using a ruler when you're working with such specific sizing. That's a lot of little lines, and I'm going a little cross-eyed. So what I'm going to do is just center the blank between the 0 and the 1 inch mark, and then I can mark my center right there at the 1/2 inch. I hope that made sense. It's a little bit of cheating. Truth be told though, I just fake it. So how about that? That looks like the middle. And then while I'm here, I'm going to take a moment to put a dot where I want my jump ring. I've got here the lowercase e, and I'm going to start with the E-L-L-E, just to the right of my dot. So this is one of the Beaducation original sets, so I can line up the bottom of my stamp there. But if you need to do this little peeking trick, go for it, just to the side of the dot. Now my L, still lowercase. Another L, came out a little high there, but I'm not going to fret it. And the E. Got the E-L-L-E, let's move the other direction with the B. The A. The N. Spelling backwards is tricky. And last but not least, my uppercase A. Now remember when we did that demo, I'm going to put this a little bit lower. When we were practicing our uppercase and our lowercase, you see that if I line this up, it's going to put my uppercase A super low. I want it to line up with my lowercase, so I'm going to lay it a little bit higher so the bottom of the letters line up. Okay, I'm really happy with the Annabelle stamped out there, and now I'm going to do the tiara stamp underneath it. When I practiced it over here in our last demo, I didn't do so well with it, so I'm not confident that I can just go straight into the sterling. So as always, if you're not super confident with the design stamp, I'm going to just let that hold on and practice it one more time over here. Remember, with stamping, there's no backspace and there's no whiteout, so if you goof it in your sterling, it's going to be really hard, or actually impossible, to fix it. It goes in the recycling bin. So I'm going to try both the methods that I taught you, the tilt and tap, or just one really strong strike with the 2-pound, and see which is working better for me on this particular day. Let's tilt and tap first. It looks like I let my hand wander a little bit. That's something you need to remember. When you're pressing and tilting, don't let it shift at all. Let me give that one more try. Better, but I seem to be famous for catching the right side. I'm going to try the 2-pound. That works really well for me. I'm going to consciously tilt it to the left and just give it one strike. That's better. I'm going to use a 2-pound hammer for this. Let's pull in the sterling and wish me luck. I don't mean to scare you with the design stamps. I just purposely chose a really hard one to help teach you how to problem solve. So I want it slightly tilted right in the middle here, and I want to brace it really well, and I'm coming in with my 2-pound. Yay! Got it. I was worried that I gave you the fear of the design stamps, when in fact most of the ones that we have are a simple design like this tiny heart here. So I want to show you how easy these are. I'm going to take this guy and just place it right here. I'm confident I can get it with one whack. I don't need to practice it, just going to hit it once with the 1-pound. And there, a simple heart right at the top. So see, it's not so scary. That looks nice. Next, we're going to punch our hole and then put black down in the grooves and polish it up. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of options for punching the hole. I've chosen the 1.8 hole punch plier, and what you see here is a little piece of thick paper. It's ripped off of a business card, because sometimes this plier mars my metal when I squeeze it shut, so this piece of paper acts as a little bit of cushion. So I am going to line it up with the dot and just hold it first before punching. I just want to look at all the angles and make sure that's exactly where I want it. I'm pretty happy with that. So with a squeeze and then a little wiggle to get it off, I've got my hole. My next step is to put black in the grooves with whichever method you choose. I'm going to use a Sharpie and just really push the tip of the pen down in the grooves. Make sure that it gets on in there. I think my Sharpie's dying, but we will squeeze the last bit out of it that we can. There it goes. So let's take a look. Need to make sure that we have it down in the grooves of all the letters. The top of my first L there is empty. Let's get it in there. There we go. Now I'm going to take a Pro Polish pad with that micro abrasive, and I'm just going to buff over the top. It's going to take it off of the top of the pendant here, but leave it in the recessed areas. It's coming along. No need to be very gentle with this guy, just keep it on the surface and buff back and forth. So look at that. Kind of makes a mess on your hands, but that's okay. We're working with our hands here. There's my Annabelle pendant all ready for a jump ring and a chain. I've chosen an oval jump ring to hang from this pendant. I like the oval jump rings because the gap sits up on the side and the pendant sits down at the bottom. So you're less likely for that opening to open up and lose your pendant. So now, with my freshly cleaned hands, I am going to open this jump ring. And you can find a little video on opening and closing jump rings on our website. Insert my pendant. And close that guy nice and tight. And look, it's done, yay! I'm really, really happy with that. Now that you've seen the whole process all the way through, I want to throw in some tips and tricks for you. First of all, I mentioned having nothing underneath your bench block when stamping. That is true, but there is one exception. If you want to have a sand bag or a pounding bag underneath it, it's usually a thick leather filled with sand or steel shot, that's fine. It adds really, really nice resistance, and it also helps out with sound. It's not necessary, but I just want to throw that out there. Along those lines too, make sure the table that you're working on is very stable. If you're working on a wobbly table, it's going to cause the stamp to kind of jump and get that double impression look. So make sure that your table's very strong. One question we get a lot from customer service is, well, we get people calling in saying, it's not working, help me through. So we problem solve with them. And what happens is sometimes people forget their bench block altogether. You got to have a bench block. You need that hard resistance underneath the metal that you're stamping on. So let's see what else here. Oh, we get questions on, can I stamp on the back of my pendant? You can, but you need to have a much thicker metal. It's not going to work on 24 gauge. You'll notice that when you stamp on the top, it punches through a little bit on the back, the indentation of the letter. So if you bump it up to a thicker metal, you will be able to stamp on both sides, maybe like 18 gauge or thicker. Also, some people prefer to stand up when they're stamping, maybe work on a little bit of a higher table. They feel like they have more control. That's fine too. If you want to give your pendant a little bit of a domed look, you can use a dapping block and a plastic mallet. I want to have the letters facing down when I place it in my block so that it domes out. It's going to give it a nice slight curvature, not too drastic. Couple strikes with my plastic mallet, kind of moving all over to make sure I'm getting the whole thing to shape. And I want to remind you, I know I sound like a broken record, but make sure you practice your design stamps each time before you use them. Now, if you're stamping away with letters or sometimes design stamps and you only catch one side of it, you can go in and reline up your stamp and try to do it again, but it's a little tricky. So if you miss stamp and you only catch one side like I've done here, you can kind of go in and line it up, maybe close your eyes, feel the stamp fall back into the groove, and give it another whack. You may notice sometimes as you start to stamp that the metal begins to distort a little bit. So you can kind of see on these ones that I have on my bench block that they are a little bit not so straight, shall we say. As you stamp, the more stamps you put on, the more it moves the metal, right? So oftentimes it's moving it to the outside and the edges start to curl up, just like this one's a really good example. So to flatten your metal back out, you're going to want to use your trusty plastic mallet. So let me show you with this guy here. One thing you want to make sure of before you do this is that you're working on part of your bench block that is smooth and doesn't have a bunch of nicks in it. Like I've got a little bit of a mess up here, so I'm going to stay away from that. Because as we come in with the hammer and flatten, it could transfer those nicks to the back of your metal. So to flatten this guy out, we can do it face up or face down. Again, if you're going face down, that bench block better be nice and pristine. Let's do it face down for this one. And I'm just going to come in and hit it a couple times with my plastic mallet. There we go, nice and flat. Let's do another one. I've got this strip here, and as I did a lot of stars out towards the top, it started to bend it. So let's do this one face up and see if we can get that. That's a little bit better. We can flip it over as well, making sure you're on a nice part of your bench block. There we go. That's a lot more flat. Let's do one more. This guy here. Nice and flat. So there you have it. I've shown you a lot of stuff you need to know to get started making stamped metal jewelry. What's that? Oh, it's a book called Stamped Metal Jewelry. Oh, look, there's another one. They're everywhere. I'm sorry, I'm being a goofball. But this is a book that I wrote about a year ago. There's a lot of great information in here. There's a DVD in the back with basically all the stuff I just showed you now, plus a little bonus project. And throughout the book, there's a lot of different designs. We bring in a lot of metalsmithing techniques to mix with your stamping and all that you've learned today. So check it out if you want to. If you buy it from Beaducation.com, I'll even sign it for you. So cool, thanks so much for coming by today, and I hope you make some beautiful jewelry.